Hello there.
The decay and death of democracy is not an easy thing to grapple with, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the reaction to the Star Wars prequels. Ever since their release, they've been either seen as simplistic fluff or blasted for all sorts of reasons, real and imagined. And sure, these movies aren't perfect in every which way, but they've only become more frighteningly relevant with the passage of time. How? Well, it all starts with one simple statement. No matter who wins, he wins. On its surface, The Phantom Menace seems like a far more kid-friendly movie than anything else in Star Wars, and that's true. However, first impressions can be a little deceiving. Okay, they can be very deceiving. If we look past the fart jokes and kiddie behavior though, we can find a very gloomy story of a democratic republic that may be standing in its own grave. And yes, it's all because of an evil scheme to hold an innocent planet at gunpoint and force its queen to sign a piece of paper. You see, the greatest threats to freedom typically don't come out of the gate swinging. No, they often start out as little things that most people might not even notice until it's too late. This becomes blatantly obvious after our heroes pick up Anakin and make their way to the capital. There, we not only learn that the Trade Federation has been keeping the invasion of Naboo covered up, but that they have also been granted representation in the Galactic Senate. Do we have a word for that in our world? Oh right, it starts with an F and ends with an ashism. Although the government still claims to be democratic, its members can't see the catastrophe that is unfolding right before their eyes. And really, how could they? Senator Palpatine merely had to exploit the broken system, mix in victimization politics, and speak of the deep state, the bureaucrats, to get exactly what he wanted. Just to prove the point, let's imagine something a little different. What if Padme failed? Well, 2 Jedi would be dead, and Sheev would have unlimited political capital to do whatever he wants. Still, he doesn't have to sweat little things like that. At the end of it all, everyone is literally dancing to his tune, and no one has a clue. What follows is even more of a nightmare. There can be no doubt that Attack of the Clones starts off with one hell of a bang. And that's the point. When you're in the dirty business of transforming a republic into an empire, misdirection is one key to success. After all, Sheev is smart enough to know that Padme would use a decoy, so all he has to do is make a second attempt, pin it all on a political enemy, who just so happens to be his own apprentice, and scare her out of the way. Oh, and he just so happens to drag Anakin into the whole affair with some notions that he is on the path to greatness. So much the better, right? But really, the full scope of the horror comes into focus when Obi-Wan investigates the matter. Our fountain of memes learns that a previously unseen Jedi named Sifo-Dyas placed an order for the Republic, except that something else is going on. The template is the person who made the attempts on Padme's life, and he was recruited by someone named Tyrannus. Of course, Obi-Wan has no real reason to believe anything that Jango says, but he soon discovers that the bounty hunter is directly connected to the Separatists. Obviously, that means that the clone army might be compromised, right? Well, it is, but that's because one man is effectively playing space chess with himself. The next few bits of detail paint a far darker picture of the galaxy. Somehow, the Trade Federation managed to completely get away with the events of the last movie, and now they're helping to orchestrate the secession crisis. Obi-Wan is captured before he can figure out anything else, so that leaves us time to consider something from the other half of this act. To most, the budding romance between Anakin and Padme might seem like a metric ton of cheese on a platter, but I think that there's a little more to it than that. If we look past the hilariously sexy outfits that Padme wears while she's alone with Anakin, we can ask ourselves something important. Why did Padme just accept Anakin's laser removals? If you've seen this channel's look at the sequel trilogy, link in the description if you haven't, you'll know that I reference this as a possible writing contrivance. However, there is another angle that I don't think anyone has ever considered. What if Padme is actually kind of a spaceist? I mean, it would certainly fit with the other leading ladies in this series.
To be angry is to be human.
Will somebody get this big walking carpet out of my way?
The jacket! This droid says you stole it.
I kid, really, but Padme would have some reasons to think that way. After all, her only other experience with the Tuskens was that time when they randomly shot at Anakin. I don't know if this was Lucas's intention, but it would fit in with the real world. Authoritarian governments don't just pop out of nowhere. They often capitalize on issues that are already there. Before we get to the finale, we have to take a look at the happenings on Coruscant. As the crisis escalates, the Senate finds itself deadlocked over the creation of an army that just so happens to already be there. In response, Sheev and his deputy lightly pressure Jar Jar Binks into proposing a vote on emergency powers so that the Chancellor can approve the use of clones.
I love democracy.
That sure sounds like politics, doesn't it? A lot of people don't want to do their jobs, but they can blame the other guy. I'm sure that nothing bad will happen because of that, right? This just so happens to come at a decent time because Anakin and Padme are trying to rescue Obi-Wan. Of course, they are captured as well because the Separatists are actually smart on their home turf. What a novel idea, right? Naturally, our three heroes have to fight off a bunch of monsters. Once the big kitty cat gives us a gift of midriff, the Jedi show up, but they're whittled down in a fight against an endless wave of droids. However, the tide turns when the clone army shows up, and it's being led by Yoda. I know that some might think of this battle as something meaningless, but it is a spectacular backdrop for the fight against Dooku. The fight in the hangar gives us a chance to see Obi-Wan and Anakin's competence, but they're not Gary Stu's. Dooku's defeat of the two Jedi leads us to one of the primary lessons of this trilogy. Experience tends to beat raw power. That's why Yoda has to be held off with a falling pillar. With that said, Dooku's job is pretty much done for now. And just in case you didn't quite get it, the ending slaps us in the face with some all too familiar sights and sounds. That's right. You were rooting for the birth of the Empire all along. Oh, and these two get married. A great tragedy is nothing without one final adventure, but this one turns out to be just another manipulation. Out of nowhere, the Separatists strike Coruscant with a massive fleet and take Palpatine as a hostage, if one could even call this that. As always, Anakin and Obi-Wan are on the move to rescue the Chancellor. The entire battle builds up to another duel between Anakin and Dooku, and it is here that we see Palpatine's true intentions. On some level, Sheev knew that Anakin would carry the day, so why not tie up a loose end in the process? He orders Dooku's death.
Do it.
And Anakin takes the old Sith out. After a confrontation with General Grievous and another happy landing, everything is put into place for the final moves. In a moment of quiet happiness, Padme reveals that she is pregnant, but Anakin is soon tormented by visions of her death. Since he foresaw that his mother would die in a similar way, he takes these nightmares to the point of obsession. Of course, Yoda simply tells him to let it all go, seemingly blind to the problems that Anakin is dealing with. The Jedi seem to be missing a lot at this point, aren't they? To make matters even worse, Palpatine appoints Anakin to be his representative on the Jedi Council. However, we soon learn that the Jedi do not see Skywalker as master material. To the average viewer, this may seem like a typical slight, but the reality is that the Jedi completely screwed Anakin over. Back in the Clone Wars, Anakin had an apprentice by the name of Ahsoka Tano. Her training went as well as one might expect, with setbacks and victories aplenty until an attack on the Jedi Temple. With extremely flimsy evidence in hand, the Jedi Council pinned it on her, expelled her, and handed her over to a military tribunal. A last-minute confession saved Ahsoka's life, but her walkout from the Order inched Anakin that much further toward the dark side. Of course, the Jedi add on to their foolishness by ordering Anakin to spy on Sheev, but Palpatine already knows this. He seems to know a lot of things.
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
To me, this scene perfectly encapsulates Palpatine's evil. How could he know about this if he didn't prey on Anakin and perhaps give him his nightmares? As Obi-Wan battles General Grievous over on Utapau, Palpatine finally reveals that he's holding all of the cards. Although Anakin reports his discovery to Mace Windu, he starts to have second thoughts, and the conflict within him finally boils over. It just so happens that Mace and the other Masters are falling into a carefully engineered trap. In their rush to replicate their success from 1,000 years ago, they fail to consider how it could all go wrong. And sure enough, it all comes back to haunt them. Forget about the original trilogy for a moment and consider a question. How could it have ended any other way? As Anakin falls to his knees, Sidious rises in what I believe is his true form. But then we learn something interesting.
To cheat death is a power only one has achieved. But if we work together, I know we can discover the secret.
I know that some people think that Anakin should have killed Palpatine because of this, but the movie just told you why he didn't. The dark side must feel fantastic. Well, except for the fact that it rots your face. With his new apprentice in hand and everyone else under his control, only one institution stands in the way of the Emperor-in-Waiting. While Vader marches on the Jedi Temple, Sidious calls up his clone commanders, sealing the fate of his enemies with just 4 words.
Execute Order 66.
In a matter of moments, most of the Jedi across the galaxy are eradicated, and they never really knew how far gone everything was. With the help of a victim narrative, Palpatine finally delivers the killing blow to galactic democracy. He paints the Jedi as foiled assassins and assumes absolute control with promises of
Security and continuing stability.
Of course, we get to see that Palpatine doesn't really care about any of his promises. To me, this is a profound lesson from history, and I'll spell it out. If you think that you can make deals with a tyrant, you won't end up in the halls of power. This will be your fate. In his rage, Anakin's motivation turns into Vader's self-fulfilling prophecy. The once decent little boy winds up fighting his father figure, and we also get to see Yoda take on Emperor Palpatine. This dual-pronged finale allows us to see how the dark side tears apart relationships and institutions alike, to the point where Anakin is consumed by agony and flame. Obi-Wan and Yoda ultimately have to walk away from their greatest failures, letting Anakin return to enslavement in all but name. The dark pall cast over the ceiling of Anakin's coffin also affects the birth of the children that he would never really know. As one of the only 5 people who ever truly cared about him dies out of grief. Although Luke and Leia are ultimately kept safe from harm, Palpatine reigns supreme. The darkness has engulfed the galaxy. The Star Wars prequels have gotten flack and praise for their willingness to go where the originals did not dare. Sure, there may be some weird dialogue choices, silly moments, and a lack of explanation for what a Sith is, but there can be no doubt that these stories bring the magnum opus of Star Wars all the way back around to where it all started. With that said, I think it's more important to consider how these stories speak to the world that we live in. I believe I can do that with one closing statement. The Star Wars prequels are a condemnation of populism. If the obvious middle fingers at real-life politicians didn't make that clear, the lesson certainly will. For one thing, we should be extremely suspicious of those who would seek to promote fear and division. They won't have our best interests at heart. It is also more crucial than ever to grapple with the problem of corruption, which is a continued threat to our nation and the world at large. But above all else, democracy and liberty are fragile, and we must protect them in all the ways that we know how. While I do not believe that our institutions are as far gone as those in the Star Wars galaxy, too much blood, sweat, and tears have been put into them to just let them go. If we remain vigilant, then I truly believe that the future will be brighter than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked that, there's a lot more to say about Star Wars and a bunch of other movies. Be sure to subscribe for that and leave a comment down below. It's always fun. If you'd like to support the channel and all of our other efforts, the links for that can be found in the description. Keep your head up, and I'll see you next time.